Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Employee to Boss podcast. I'm your host, Hayleigh Hayhurst. I'm the owner of Espresso Podcast Production, and I help businesses and entrepreneurs increase their profits and visibility through podcasting and marketing strategies that work. Today, I wanted to talk about a topic that I get a lot of questions about, podcast marketing. So this is really what I built my business around. This is where I stand out from other podcast producers. I do more than just editing. I do the strategy. I do the marketing. I have clients that I post their graphics for. I create their graphics, do their marketing strategy, all of that. And I also offer strategy calls to new clients, one-off clients, potential clients, all of that. Because the marketing strategy is one of the most important parts of actually getting a podcast up and running. So today I wanted to talk about some common marketing mistakes that are costing you time and money when it comes to your podcast. And so this is going to be 5 tips or 5 situations that I see a lot of that people who maybe aren't marketing experts typically do. They're really common mistakes and it's just something to be aware of. So if I say anything that you do, this is not a roast. This is just to make you aware that you could be spending your time better. You could be moving yourself forward to increase your profits. Really, these are just tips. So take this information, come follow me on Instagram because I talk about how to avoid these all the time. It's at Espresso Podcast Production. And then you can also book a strategy call with me on my website. It's espressopodcastproduction.com. So I'll put all of those links in the show notes, but let's get right into the 5 most common issues that I see when it comes to podcast marketing. The first one is not spending time understanding who your audience is. So with this podcast, I tailored this to reach out to people who are just starting their business, starting their podcast, really are in the beginning phases of their business. And so on Instagram, when I do my marketing, I use hashtags that relate to them. I use words that relate to them. I know who they are. I even have, they're called an ideal client avatar or an ideal listener avatar in this case, that you can even name this person. So it's easy just to start recording and putting out content, hoping that people will come to you, but you really need to think about who you're recording this for. Who is this actually for? Who is this going to help? Who should spend 30 minutes, an hour listening to your episodes? Think about these before you actually start putting out content, because this is where your listeners will come from. So if you don't spend time getting to know who they are, your content might be all over the place. Let's say you intend to talk to moms in their 30s, or let's say you intend to talk to, in my case, podcasters or people who want to start a podcast. If I think about that once and then just start creating content for anyone, they're not going to come to me. I'm not going to connect with the right people. So for me, I had to think about who this person is, where they live, how much money they make, all of those things, and then go out there and actually do the market research. Actually see where this person hangs out, see what hashtags they're using on Instagram, see what words they're using on Facebook, maybe how they describe themselves. I typically wouldn't work with someone who uses the word solopreneur. That's just because if they're hiring me as a podcast editor or a strategist, they're probably going to think of themselves as someone who works with a team. And so thinking of just tiny changes, entrepreneur versus solopreneur, those are things that you need to really think about before you start putting out more content tailored to no one for your podcast. The next common mistake that I see is the host on social media not having a strong call to action, or even in your podcast episodes not having a strong call to action. So how I started this episode was actually with a call to action where you can find more information about this, and if you wanted one-on-one help, you could actually book a call with me. So when you think about the end goal of your podcast, I'm going to guess it's not just 100 episodes for fun. It's probably you want to monetize it. You want to get more clients. You want to do this, do that. And if it is just for fun, think about what the deeper thing is. Do you want to grow a community? Do you want to get a certain audience? Do you want to be respected as an expert in a certain audience? There's always a deeper meaning behind it. So think about that, and then where can you direct people afterwards? So one thing about podcasts is if someone is spending 15, 20, 30, an hour, however long with you, they're going to want to see who you are, more about you, what you look like, all of those things. And so be sure to have some sort of social media presence that you can send them to after the episode. Alternatively, on Instagram, so I started my business well before I started my podcast. So anytime I post something about my podcast or related to my podcast, I always make it very clear where people could come and listen to this. I always say search Employee to Boss on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or you can go to espressopodcastproduction.com/podcast. So having a really strong call to action and clear call to action is very important. You can have anyone do anything, honestly, as long as you explain to them how and make it easy for them. So really keep that in mind. People will do what you want them to do as long as you make it clear for them. The third common mistake that I see a lot of is you don't have a strategy when you're posting on social media. So I'm not saying that you need the most curated Instagram of all times, but what you do need is clear goals in mind. Like I was just talking about, what is your end goal? Where do you want your podcast to go? Is it to get sponsors? Is it to get 100K downloads and have articles written about you, or you referenced in articles as an expert? What is it? Because then you'll need to come up with the strategy on social media to be behind that. This comes together with the graphics you're posting, the words you're using, the mission you have, who you're connecting with. We'll get into that in a minute. But it really comes down to when you're posting, what you're posting, and how you're posting it. Are you doing it intentionally, or are you creating content that same day to post that same day, and it really just looks like that? Are you creating your graphics last minute? Are you writing your content last minute? Are you recording your podcast episodes last minute? And I'm not saying that I have never done that before, but I have an overarching goal in mind, and I know the strategy that it takes to get there. So strategy is hard to talk about on podcast episodes because it's so customizable per industry and per goal and per topic. So definitely reach out to me on Instagram, Facebook, wherever you want to find me, and we can talk about a certain strategy for you. But this is one of the most important parts, and you really need to think about who your audience is and what your goals are, and that will help you build up the strategy that you have. The next common mistake that I see is not spending time on your graphics. This seems like one of those afterthoughts for a lot of podcasters because we're recording our episodes, we're talking weekly about certain things, and then the Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn or wherever you're posting seems to sometimes be an afterthought. And that's one of the most common things that I see mistakes made because your audience is most likely going to come from your social media presence. So spend time on your graphics, because if you're creating graphics that are shareable and beautiful and on brand for you, like you know your brand colors, you know your words that you use, your common words, you know your fonts, you know what photos to use, this builds a brand for you, and then people will share it on their social media stories, their Instagram story, they'll repost it, and this just gives you more visibility. And so the most honest thing that I can say here is people will not share ugly graphics. And this is one of the most common things I see actually in my Facebook group. So I have a lot of people who want to promote their podcast in my Facebook group, which I allow, but if they are not spending time on their graphics, or their graphics are just chaotic or tell me nothing about the episode, I honestly don't post it. I don't want that on the feed. And so spend an afternoon, get Canva or something that can create you some good graphics. When I launched my podcast, that is exactly what I did. I knew my brand colors. I knew what vibe I was going for. Then I got on Canva and created some templates. Canva.com also has some great templates that you can use. I created my own, but I used inspiration from other graphics, so you can definitely do the same. That's Canva.com. I have the paid version, which I would recommend, but when you're just starting out, you can totally get away with the free version. So go on there, create some beautiful graphics, get that strategy, and just start posting towards the right audience. The last common mistake I want to address is about that right audience. So maybe you know exactly who your audience is. Maybe you know exactly what you want from them, exactly who they are, all of those things, but you're not connecting with them. You're not putting an effort to make that connection. So I really want you to challenge yourself to start reaching out to 5 people a week who you know would love your podcast, who you know would enjoy listening, who you know would actually get value from listening, and send them a message. This message will say something like, hey, whatever their name is, I found your profile on Instagram and I just wanted to connect with you. I'm the host of this podcast, and because of this post that you made, I wanted to connect with you. Or you could go something like, hey, I love this post that you made. I'd love to connect. Let's talk more. And then after talking for, a message or two, drop your podcast. Don't make this salesy, make this genuine connections, which is why I'm just saying 5 people a week. That's 1 person a day, Monday through Friday. Send them a message. They might not always respond, but make it genuine. Actually look at their profile, follow them, see if they post any stories, see what they're all about. I do this for one of my clients. She has a podcast about the outdoors. And so I find people who maybe have outdoor businesses or people who are avid hikers. And I'm in the Pacific Northwest, so this is everyone and their moms. But I find the people who would actually enjoy listening to her podcast, who I know would learn something. So do the same for yours. So just to recap, the 5 most common mistakes that I see when it comes to podcast marketing that is costing you time and money is not spending time to find and figure out who your audience is, not having a strong call to action, not having a solid strategy, not having graphics that are shareable and actually engaging, and then not reaching out to your ideal audience to make some genuine connections. I hope that this was helpful, and again, if I called you out on anything, do not be worried. This is all things that are fixable and can only better your podcast from here. It's honestly better if you have some of these mistakes because then you can see some instant growth from actually doing these topics. So let me know if you have any questions, and I'm always available on Instagram, Facebook, and through my website. So this was a really fun solo episode, and I will be back next week with another guest. Thank you for listening to the Employee to Boss podcast. If you made it to the end of this episode, I hope that you implement the actionable steps from this week's experts so you can get started with your business today. Please rate, review, and subscribe to the Employee to Boss podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. It helps more than you could ever imagine. Remember, a little progress each day leads to big results. We come out with a new episode every Tuesday. To access our show notes, transcripts, and courses, please check out espressopodcastproduction.com.